Okami, and in particular its HD re-release, is a true masterpiece of the video game art form. Everything about it is breathtaking, from the graphics, the music, the fascinating story, and the world based on Japanese legends that have existed for centuries, and the gameplay. I can honestly say right now that if you own a PlayStation 2, a Wii or a PlayStation 3 and you haven't yet played this game, you should just stop whatever you're doing right now and play it. If you still need some convincing, however, then feel free to stick around as I try to explain exactly what makes this game so wonderful. First though, a little history. Okami was developed by the Japanese studio Clover, created as a subset of Capcom with a view to developing original IP rather than sequels. Founding members include Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil fame, Atsushi Inaba, and the director of Okami, Hideki Kamiya. After developing several games including the Beautiful Joe series, God Hand, and of course Okami, Capcom attempted to merge the studio back into the parent company. But these three key team members decided to leave instead, and started a new studio by the name of Platinum Games, which is still alive and well today and responsible for the highly successful Bayonetta franchise, which is also directed by Kamiya. While it is sad that Clover Studios was only active for a short period of time, the games they left behind are all fantastic and are still being discovered and appreciated by people today. Capcom even decided to make a sequel to Okami on the Nintendo DS, Okami Den, which is worthy of its own review sometime. In the meantime, let's take a deeper look at Okami and what makes it so special. This is a section that I dropped from my reviews a while back, but I feel it is important to cover it for certain types of game, and Okami is no exception. The game begins with a fairly lengthy cutscene that explains that 100 years ago, the land of Nippon was cursed by a foul demon called Orochi. This 8-headed snake beast, with a body like a mountain, would demand that a maiden were sacrificed to him. Last time the sacrifice was to be held, however, a warrior by the name of Nagi stepped up to try and stop the demon, as he was in love with the intended victim. As he made his way to the moon cave and began to battle the beast, a pure white wolf arrived on the scene and started to assist him in his fight. Together the two of them were able to slay Orochi, but the wolf Shiranui was poisoned during the battle and sadly succumbed to the venom shortly after. The people of Kamiki village built a statue of the wolf to commemorate his bravery and sacrifice. In the present day, the evil force of Orochi has been unleashed upon the world once again. The living descendant of the hero Nagi is a bumbling drunk. Nippon is in dire need of someone to step in and help defeat the forces of evil. It's at this point that the statue of Shiranui is possessed by the sun god Amaterasu and comes to life. She makes it her mission to slay Orochi once again and protect the people of Nippon. Throughout the course of Okami you will meet many colourful characters such as Isun, the tiny bug artist, and of course Susanoo, the drunkard descendant of Nagi. As well as the main plot to slay the demon, you will also take part in many smaller tales where you come to the assistance of the people of Nippon, including the rescue of a sparrow princess from the terrible cutters and seeking out the 9 canine warriors. These tales are all drawn from actual stories that have been told and retold throughout Japanese history. I found it quite fascinating to learn the backstory to this game. If you have any interest in this stuff yourself, then I highly recommend that you check out the Mythology of Okami Tumblr site. If you are watching this video, then that must mean you've got eyes, which also means you're able to see just how amazing the visuals of Okami are. They looked great the first time around when the game was released in 2006, but now they're in full HD, they're jaw-dropping. Capcom have applied a filter to the visuals that makes everything look like it's drawn on parchment, which I think is a great effect. For some reason this was removed from the Wii version, making that version of the game look a little strange to me. In the PS3 version you do have the option of turning the filter off, or making it stronger, but I think it's fine on the default setting. One of the greatest moments in Okami is when you get to use the restoration brush power to restore a guardian sapling and the entire area around the tree explodes with colourful flowers and grass. Most of the areas that you will explore are cursed to begin with, and everything is dark and spooky, with packs of imps and demons roaming the overworld. Certain parts of the world will drain Amaterasu of her godly powers and turn her back into a normal wolf until you leave them, so it's important that you seek out the guardian sapling as soon as possible and purify it. By making the cursed areas so dark and depressing to look at, the burst of colour is that much more enjoyable when it happens. While the traditional Japanese music that makes up the soundtrack of Okami is absolutely phenomenal, I do have a minor problem with the sound in the game. I have never been a fan of games that use random sound effects in place of speech, as the noise can grate on the ears and it drowns out the music. It was a huge problem in the Golden Sun series, could be a nuisance in Banjo-Kazooie, and now has reared its ugly head once again in Okami. If the developers would at least give you the option to turn the speech off, then all would be right with the world, but alas they didn't. As well as the full-length tunes that make up the soundtrack, Okami has quite a large range of little jingles that occur at certain times, such as when you find a key item. This is just one thing that Clover has borrowed from the Zelda series, more on that later, and they're all quite charming and memorable little tunes. I've used them to signify the start of each section in this review, in fact. At its very simplest, I think it's fair to say that Okami is a Zelda clone. In fact, the developers have themselves said that they were great fans of the Zelda series and wanted to make their own version of that style of game. That's not to say that's all there is to the game, as Okami easily does enough to set itself apart from Nintendo's franchise, and perhaps even elevate itself above it in some aspects. The main differentiator is the use of the many brush powers that are given to you over the course of the story. At key points, constellations will be revealed to Amaterasu, and if you use your celestial brush to complete them, then her fellow deities will come down and bestow a new technique on Ami and the player. Early ones include the ability to bring withered trees back to life and the ability to draw a bomb. Eventually you will be doing things like siphoning water from a pond to put out a fire, or taking a flame from a torch and using it to melt a block of ice that just so happens to contain a chest with a key item inside it. The brush techniques extend to combat as well. For example, you might get in a fight with a fire wheel and an ice wheel at the same time. You can use your brush to take the fire from one enemy and douse the ice of the other, thus stunning it. Then you can quickly slash across the stunned enemy to cut it in half, killing it easily. There are periodic dungeons to explore throughout Okami where the amount of puzzles is somewhat increased, although these are far less frequent than your typical Zelda game and also less intricate. In fact, the difficulty level as a whole is quite tame. There is no puzzle too taxing and no enemy too tough to complete for most competent players. Some may see this as a weakness, and perhaps it is. However, I still found the game incredibly enjoyable despite this. Upon completing the game, there is a New Game Plus mode which does offer more challenge. More often than not, a game that is truly great in all other areas still sadly scores quite lowly in the innovation section. Sadly, most games just tend to iterate on what's gone before. Okami does bring some new things to the table though, namely the brush techniques. These are used liberally throughout the game, both for solving puzzles and in combat, and they work just fine for the most part. Every so often they don't quite work as well as you would hope, which can frustrate. Apart from this, I also think the presentation of the game is in itself innovative, with the unique fusion of the painted look, cel shading, Japanese art and music styles, and mythology. Great stuff. Okami is a deceptively huge game. At around the 10-hour mark, it feels like you're making real progress, and the fateful battle with Orochi is just around the corner. Indeed it is, but it's not the end. In fact, as the game points out itself, the adventure is only just beginning. You can easily spend 40 hours playing through the story, and should you choose to participate in all the optional activities like the wanted lists, mini-games and hunting down all the hidden items like stray beads, this time can be drastically extended. Whether or not such a lengthy and plot-based game has any replay value is debatable and depends on the individual. I for one enjoy replaying games that are this good every once in a while. I completed Okami when it was released on the PS2 in 2006, and I'm well on my way to doing so again with the help of the PS3 HD remake. A copy of the original PS2 version sells for around £10 in good condition, and for around £10 to £15 for the Wii version. If you own a PS3, then the downloadable HD remake is the way to go though, as it easily rivals any modern game in its presentation, and will only set you back around £10, less if it's part of a PSN sale. If I were ever to someday come up with a list of my top 10 favourite PS2 games, then Okami would definitely be in there and pretty high up. Every element comes together to form an almost perfect game, apart from the few very small niggles that I mentioned during my review. Once again, I can't stress enough that if you haven't played Okami yet, then you owe it to yourself to acquire it and at least give it a try. You might well discover one of the best games you've ever played. That's it for this season of PS2 Tuesdays. I expect I will be back sometime in the new year. Until then though, keep playing those PS2 games and I'll see you again soon.